Hi, this is Gary Auden, and I'm bringing you an EDUcast, sponsored by AVST and Telecom Reseller. We're going to be talking about unified messaging, your PBX, and Microsoft's announcements. With me today is Tom Menifee, CTO of AVST, and what we're going to talk about today are 5 subjects. The Microsoft announcement that may impact you. What is that impact? You have some business challenges. You have to plan for the change, and we'll talk about migration options. The point I want to make on this slide is that if you have a PBX and you have a session border controller, you may have been using it for unified communications and unified messaging. How does this all fit together? Well, this is what you own. This is an investment that's worthwhile. You have a session border controller. You have that for your security and transcoding. You have unified messaging. The problem is if you're also working with Skype for Business, you may see some changes. And that's where Tom is going to come in on the next slide and talk about that announcement.
What Microsoft announced is that they are discontinuing session border controller access for third-party PBXs. So effective July of 2018, customers that currently have Exchange Unified Messaging in the online variety, so Office 365, Exchange Unified Messaging, if that's currently integrated into their on-premise PBX, they're going to have to make a change because that connectivity option is going away in a little less than a year.
A question I have to you is, this is irrevocable? In other words, the customer has no choice?
Yes, Microsoft has indicated that this is a firm deadline, so that they've made no indication that there's going to be any extensions on this. There isn't an option for customers to pay extra money and gain longer access, that sort of thing. So this seems to be a definitive end-of-life announcement associated with that session border controller.
One of the points that's important to me is when you look at the impact here, this affects my PBX. It could shorten its life. In other words, it could hurt my investment. If I'm using a session border controller to talk to PSTN, a lot of people ignore the PSTN these days, but the point is it's still a major communications vehicle. We also have connections to cellular networks that might be affected by this. If you're using the session border controller through SIP connections, you may find that your service for SIP connections is on-net free SIP calls, and that may be stopped. And also, through the session border controller, you may have access presently to cheaper international calls. All of these things have to be investigated before you decide what your solution should be, because you want to retain as much of this as possible. So Tom, how about you cover some of the business challenges here?
So as I mentioned earlier, Gary, Microsoft's announced that the connectivity into Exchange Online unified messaging is changing such that third-party PBXs will no longer be able to connect into the Exchange Online unified messaging environment. So 2 customers that this impacts. The customers that currently are using this infrastructure or this connectivity method, it impacts them. But it also impacts those customers that have been planning or thinking about moving to Office 365. So if they've got a different unified messaging solution, if they've got Exchange UM on-premise, they aren't able to move into that Office 365 environment if they plan to continue to use their third-party PBX. So whether they're in this architecture today or they're planning to move to that architecture, they've got a major business challenge here, which is they're going to have to do something different. And we'll talk about what those options are as we move through this presentation.
I think one of the points that a lot of people don't realize is this is an operational cost, which means I have less money for innovation, and I don't necessarily as a customer see this as innovation. Would you agree with that?
Gary, I agree with you. Customers that we've talked to, this is not something that they were planning for. This is not an area that they thought, okay, let's budget for changes in how we approach unified messaging. They've been happy with the Exchange Online unified messaging solution, had no plans to make changes in that area. And so this is all, this is a new project. They've got to procure, they've got to analyze what they're going to procure, they've got a budget for that, and then they've actually got to go through the deployment process around this this solution. So not something that they were planning for previously. This is a new challenge that's plopped onto their plate.
The next slide is, I think, a good title. They have to rethink their connections. What goals do they have in mind for those?
Yes, so Gary, the connection really does change here. What Microsoft has stated is the Exchange Online environment, you can no longer directly connect that into your on-premise PBX. And so one of the ways of changing that connection is by putting a unified messaging solution in the middle of that. So if you want to keep your PBX, which a lot of these customers do, they want to keep Microsoft Office 365 in the Exchange environment. They like both of those pieces. They want to continue to use unified messaging. Then the way they can do that is put a unified messaging system in between, which changes the connectivity. Rather than having a direct connection from Exchange Online into the PBX, instead the unified messaging system takes care of that for them. So the UM system integrates into the on-prem PBX and then also integrates into the Exchange environment using Microsoft provided APIs and provides all the unified messaging functionality on that solution rather than as part of the Exchange provided unified messaging solution.
I noticed in the press release that people really need to plan their migration here, but the issue is retaining investment. And I think one of the things that you bring to the fore is working with a trusted experience solution vendor, which then delivers a smooth migration. But also, whenever you have disruptions like this, we have user training and user experiences. Do you have any comments about that?
One of the things that customers really want to accomplish here, because this was let's call it an unplanned event, and for enterprise customers, it's really a pretty short amount of time to implement something new from conception to delivery. And so one of the things that they really want to accomplish is try to keep things as similar as possible to their end user constituents. So customers that we're talking to, it's important to them. They want to keep the phone system as is. Their users already understand how to use that phone system and they want to continue to do so. Same is true on the email side or the Exchange side, where the customers or the users already are familiar with the Outlook forms. And so one of the things that we've done is provide the ability to retain those Outlook forms that Microsoft provided specifically for unified messaging, and keep that piece of it the same, keep your desktop phones the same, and then the unified messaging component in the middle delivers very similar functionality, but that's the one thing that changes. So anything that happens over the telephone would then be provided by the new unified messaging solution. But the desktop application is the same, the telephone experience is the same for outside callers and for placing calls, that sort of thing. The only thing that changes is some core unified messaging functionality.
When I read the press release, though, the press release talked about 4 options for migration. Can you briefly go through those?
Yes, Microsoft has laid out 4 different options, of which I really believe 3 of them are very similar. So let's walk through those. Option 1 and option 2 are nearly identical. They both involve the same thing, which is let's remove the PBX, get rid of that and replace it with Skype for Business. The only difference between option 1 and option 2 is where Skype for Business is. In option 1, it's Skype for Business in the cloud, so using their cloud PBX as part of Office 365. Option 2 is Skype for Business within the customer IT environment, so it's deployed on-premise using the enterprise voice capabilities of Skype for Business. Option 3 is similar. It involves a Skype for Business deployment, but Skype for Business could be integrated into the third-party PBX. So use the PSTN connectivity of the on-premise PBX, but funnel that through Skype for Business, which could then connect up to Exchange Unified Messaging Online. So option 1, option 2, option 3, they all involve Skype for Business, deploying voice capabilities within Skype for Business. Option 4 is the only one that doesn't require Skype for Business. And that's where AVST falls, is in the option 4 camp. And what option 4 really is deploying a third-party voicemail or unified messaging solution that then sits in between the Exchange Online environment and the PBX environment. So integrates into the PBX, can deposit messages into Exchange, but it's providing the unified messaging solution, not Exchange. Exchange is no longer in the picture. It's shut off, and the third-party unified messaging solution takes over that responsibility.
Well, you're from AVST, and not everyone in our audience knows AVST, so where do you fit in the unified messaging world?
Gary, AVST has been providing unified messaging solutions for about 20 years now, and really viewed by both customers, partners in the market, IT consultants, that sort of thing. Everyone views AVST as really a best-of-breed solution within a number of unified communications areas, but unified messaging especially. Because of our history around this, because of the experience that we've had delivering these solutions for years and years and years to customers, both within a Microsoft environment and outside of a Microsoft environment, we're really viewed as best-of-breed solution for unified messaging, which does naturally qualify us to be a consideration for customers that are faced with this situation.
Let's circle back to that Microsoft announcement, and then you have a particular option available to us. Would you amplify that, please?
Okay, so we've gone through this a bit already, but just to reiterate, option 4, which I talked about, that's really where AVST sits. And what that is deploying our CXE solution in between the existing phone system and the existing account within Office 365. So the Exchange capability that's hosted within Office 365, that can still be used as a single message repository for all voice, fax, email messages, but the telephonic connectivity is happening between the CXE server and the on-prem PBX. So any incoming call gets answered by CXE. We try to deliver it to the intended party. If they don't pick up, we can take a message. That message can then be deposited into Exchange, and any client access that is used to access Exchange can then be used to access the voice messages or the fax messages that have flowed through the CXE solution. So whether it's unified messaging, whether it's auto attendant capabilities, maybe call center capabilities, we'll talk about those a little bit more later on. But all of those applications run on the CXE platform and integrate into the two platforms. As I mentioned earlier, the phone system can remain the same. The Outlook forms for unified messaging can remain the same, but anything that happens around unified messaging over the telephone, that's going to be an AVST functionality or AVST provided functionality.
You've mentioned a lot of benefits, and some of the benefits you've already mentioned on the screen. Are there other points you'd like to bring up?
The CXE solution really is a great alternative to Exchange provides a lot of the same unified messaging functionality. It can integrate into the environment that the customer already has, and as I mentioned, we can even keep some of the Outlook functionality the same, so minimize the amount of disruption. But it's also an opportunity to look at new functionality. As our platform is different than Exchange there are going to be some advantages to moving forward with the CXE solution. Just to name a couple of them for you. So we've got a full offering around notifications. So you can send outcall notifications, SMS notifications, in addition to email notification into unified messaging. One of the things that we've done over the years is create telephone user interface emulation, so that if you have users that want the system to mimic another system that they were familiar with. So if you've got a group of users that were really familiar with Nortel Call Pilot, or they were really familiar with the Octel interface or the Intuity interface, we can mimic those so that on a user-by-user basis, they can gain access to all these unified messaging functions, but they're using commands that are familiar to them. And outside of that, because this is the CXE platform, it's a lot more than unified messaging. It's got full-featured automated attendant and IVR functionality. It's got a virtual personal assistant, call center functionality via our TeamQ solution. So there's a number of different applications that all ride on top of the CXC platform that customers can take a look at, and maybe they can move this into an effort where it's beyond just, hey, we have to replace Exchange UM because of the change implemented by Microsoft, but in addition to doing that, maybe we can take on some additional unified communications functionalities.
The next slide, I think, brings up a word you haven't mentioned, and that is your versatility and interoperability.
Gary, if you look at really the history of AVST, we've always been call control independent. So we've never tried to produce a PBX. That was never something that we wanted to do. And instead, we've always sat behind the phone system or the PBX or the call control solution. And one of the things that we've done, since we really focus on enterprise customers, what we've found is a number of these customers have different phone systems. They've grown through acquisition, so this facility has an Avaya. The new facility that we just bought, they have a Cisco, and somebody else has a BroadSoft solution that's hosted. We can integrate with all those, and we can integrate them all at the same time. And so with our platform, you've really got a lot of functionality where you can centralize the messaging call processing behind these disparate call control solutions. And we found that to be extremely appealing to our large enterprise customers.
I noticed that you're a partner with Microsoft. Does that help you qualify to do this?
AVST's been a long time business partner of Microsoft. We're Windows based, so that naturally puts us into the Microsoft camp, but we've really taken a lot further than that. Not just being a Microsoft partner, but we've actually achieved gold status in a couple of areas. We've got gold competencies in both communications and messaging. In Microsoft terminology, communications is their Skype for Business solution, and then messaging is their Exchange solution. So we've gone through the testing and the requirements that have allowed us to achieve that gold competency level. That puts us into rarefied air within the partner program. We've also worked with some of the third parties to verify our solution, like TechVision is an example of that. Within the Skype for Business environment, this discussion has really been about Exchange, but for customers that are moving forward with Skype for Business, we can integrate to that just like we can all the other phone systems that I mentioned. And so customers that are moving away from, say, a traditional phone system and are making that move to Skype for Business, we can help them with that move. We can integrate with all the different call control environments, including Microsoft, and specifically within Skype for Business, those customers tend to gravitate towards our voice and unified messaging solutions. They take a look at our automated attendant and IVR solutions because we can do things differently than what's natively available from Microsoft. We've got some really nice mobility capabilities. And then I mentioned earlier our informal call center solution, which is called TeamQ. And that's a really nice solution that has no comparable solution within the Microsoft portfolio.
You have a promotion available now, which I think the average customer should say, I need to look at this right away.
Gary, we've really taken a look at what can we do to help these customers move to an alternative solution. As discussed earlier, none of the customers were planning on making this move. This isn't something that they had decided, hey, let's move away from Exchange UM online, let's do something different, let's budget for it and plan for it. This is all kind of new and fresh with very little time to do that. And so one of the things that AVST's done is put together a promotion to help them move towards our solution. Since this was unbudgeted, what we've done is essentially, if they want to move to a hosted solution, then that's all a subscription model that they can do on a per user per month basis. But if they want to purchase a solution outright and control it, deploy it within their own infrastructure, we've come up with a promotion that allows them to eliminate a great number of the upfront costs associated with the solution and instead put all the costs into the ongoing maintenance. So even to the point of if there's a 5-year commitment, so you commit to 5 years of maintenance, the underlying software licensing actually goes to free. It's a scaling discount associated with it. So we're hopeful that this gives customers an easier way to move away from the Exchange Online solution and move over to the AVST solution.
When I read the mission statement that you have on this slide here, it's like the mission statement I would like to have as an IT executive.
AVST really takes a look at 3 different use case scenarios: the individual worker, teams within a business, and then the business as a whole. I mentioned earlier we're completely focused on enterprise customers. So within that, if you look at communications, individual workers, it tends to be around mobility. How do they manage their various forms of communication while they're mobile? Teams, it's a little different. It's all about collaboration and how do we share communications within that team. And then businesses, it tends to be more about how do you manage communications from the outside in terms of your vendors, your customers, your partners, whoever it may be, external communications coming into the business. How do you manage those communications? AVST's solution here is really to provide solutions to all 3 of these constituents.
You have been in business for a long time. This seems to be the key points that help you stay in business and be successful.
We've had great success within the enterprise market, and there's a number of different reasons for that. The larger enterprises tend to have a very diverse environment, and so they need a lot of different components, and they need to purchase for today but plan for the future. And so everything that we do around our solution, whether that's our product solution or our services solution, it's really providing flexibility to these enterprise customers. So our feature set is all around unified communications applications. It's primarily around voice applications. We deliver them in a modular manner so that customers can purchase them discretely or as a suite. They can work with existing IT infrastructure, whether that's their PBX environment, whether that's their email environment or their instant messaging environment, their mobile phone environment, whatever it may be. The AVST solution is able to be delivered into that environment, work with what they have today, and still work with what they may replace it with in the future.
I'd like to point out that there's a number of webinars available, unified messaging white papers, and user materials. I found that the AVST Spotlight on Skype for Business was a very interesting publication to read. Contact information is provided at the bottom of the screen. This is important. If you're international, this means that you're really dealing with an international company as well, not just somebody who's local. And I'd like to thank you very much, Tom, for this EDUcast.
Thanks, Gary.